All right, what follows is, from my perspective, falling into the realm of what I would study if I were you for your lab midterm in Anatomy 1. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to stop me, but I'm just going to roll on through this, and we'll see what we can get to. And I'm just kind of reading my notes out, and that's what I use to build these exams. All right, first comment is you need to know a little bit about your body cavities. So like thoracic cavity versus abdominal cavity, abdominal cavity versus pelvic cavity, what the diaphragm's role in this is in terms of separating these body cavities out. Inside of these body cavities, you should have a good grasp of the different organs that are found there. So lungs and heart up in the thoracic cavity, liver and stomach and intestines in the abdominal cavity, just this kind of thing, all right? Nothing that awful complicated. And in the abdominal cavity, it would not be the worst idea ever to be able to tell me the names of the regions of the abdominal cavity and kind of, like if I were to give you a location, be able to tell me which region of the abdominal cavity that might be located in. All right, can you guys hear me okay? Just making sure that we are on good audio. All right, cool. If anybody's got problems, you let me know. All right, let's see what else I've got for you here. All right, not only that, but these various organs and organ systems that we've talked about up to this stage, you should have a decent grasp of what they kind of do, all right? So if I ask you what your cardiovascular system does, you should be able to say it pumps blood. If I ask you what your integumentary system does, you should be able to tell me that it protects you against radiation, for example. All right, nothing that complicated. Again, this is lab. I want complicated stuff in lecture. In lab, I just want you to prove to me that you kind of know what you're doing based off of what you see. All right, let's see what else we got. All right, you need to know your sections of the body. Sagittal, transverse, frontal. If I show you an image or give you an example, you need to be able to tell me which one it is. And yeah, that's obviously very important. Now, one of the things that's going to figure prominently on this test, there's sort of two overarching concepts to this exam, and that is histology and the skeletal system. Okay, histology and the skeletal system. And I'm going to try to do the skeletal system parts and pieces that I would advise you to be more aware of towards the end of this, and we'll do the histology more up front. All right. Now, also built into this, we talked a lot about the skin. If I were you, I'd know the layers of the skin, like the epidermal layers, the strata, if you will. I'd be able to tell me the difference between thick and thin skin. If I were you, I'd be able to tell me about the pigments of the skin and where you find them. The glands in the skin, so an eccrine gland versus a sebaceous gland. I'd be able to talk about those both on a model image and on a histological micrograph. So through a microscope, in other words. I'd be able to tell me about hair follicles and erector pili muscles. Meissner's versus Pacinian corpuscles. Be able to tell me what dermal papillae are and the difference between the papillary layer and the reticular layer of the dermis. All of that, man. All of that is fair game. All right, I'm working on it, folks. All right, so the vertebrae. In your spine, you need to be able to walk me through how many of each type of vertebrae you have. You need to know the basic parts that make a cervical vertebrae, that make a thoracic vertebrae, that make a lumbar vertebrae. And in particular, you need to know about the axis and the atlas and their parts that make them very different. Okay, that's the C1 and C2 vertebrae, axis and the atlas. If I were you, I would know sort of how the tibia and fibula articulate, how the radius, ulna, and humerus kind of articulate, how the humerus and the scapula kind of articulate, and and how the ribs can articulate with the thoracic vertebrae. All fair game. General parts and pieces of the ribs and sternum. So I want to know true, false, and floating ribs, and parts of the sternum where they connect. Walk me through the 3 different types of cartilage. So be able to tell me about elastic cartilage, what makes elastic cartilage elastic cartilage. Be able to identify it off a microscope slide. Be able to tell me where in the body you'd look for it. Talk to me about hyaline cartilage and how they are similar. Tell me where in the body you'd find hyaline cartilage. Be able to identify it off of a slide. And then tell me about fibrocartilage. So talk to me about intervertebral discs. Walk me through the concepts of fibrocartilage, having that gooey center layer called the nucleus pulposus and the ring of fibers around the outside called the annulus fibrosus. Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, general connective tissues. So be able to tell me about like areolar versus dense irregular versus dense regular connective tissues. Be able to tell me what kind of fiber types predominate, and just generally speaking, be able to talk to me about elastic fibers versus collagen fibers. All right, we looked at 3 different types of muscle. So be able to identify smooth, skeletal, and cardiac muscle. Be able to tell me if they are striated or not. Be able to tell me if they're voluntary or not. And for cardiac muscle, I would know what intercalated discs are and what's important about them. Osteocytes in lacunae, chondrocytes in lacunae, and obviously the major parts of a bone slide. So we talked about the osteons. We talked about how the osteons are made up of individual rings called lamellae, how you find osteocytes in their lacunae inside of this. We talked about central canals that go up and down through the bone. We talked about perforating canals that go right to left through the bone. All of that's fair game. Let's see, we described the outer covering of bone being the periosteum, how the periosteum is anchored to the bone using short little, basically ligaments. They're little fibers called Sharpie's fibers. And I think we broached the subject of the canaliculi. These are the little cracks that allow for communication between osteocytes in the bone. Okay, so you got to assume that the skull is going to have several questions. Okay, you just have to assume I'm going to put a bunch of questions off the skull. I will put some of the easy ones on there, so just having to label maybe a bone or 2 off of the skull would be fair. But you can guarantee that I'll be asking a few of the minor openings off the skull. So if you look inside or from underneath, you can see the opening sort of towards the back around the foramen magnum. So you got the foramen magnum, and then you've got your jugular foramen, your carotid canals. You can see the internal acoustic meatus and the external acoustic meatus. Looking forward from there, you can see the optic canals where the optic nerves pass. You can see what's called the sella turcica, which is the indentation where the pituitary gland sits. Yeah, man. Oh, and yeah, sure. Hang on. Let me finish this thought, and then I'll answer your question. And then up above that, you can see the ethmoid bone with the cribriform plates on either side with their olfactory foramina. and the cristagalli. It's not a terrible idea to know what the cribriform plates and the cristagalli, like the cribriform plates with their olfactory foramina, to understand how they are assistant to your capacity to sense smell. All right, now question. Go ahead. Okay, so all right. Here's the major difference there. The jugular foramen goes all the way through the skull into the cranial cavity, whereas the carotid canal goes in from the bottom and then branches through the bone itself, so you don't see it from the inside. Do you understand? Not from the inside, no. So on the inside, what you'll see near where you would expect that is that internal acoustic meatus, which is just where a nerve exits from the inner ear to go to the temporal lobe of the brain. Yeah, no problem. So that's actually a very important nuance. The carotid canals, they enter into let me rephrase, the carotid arteries enter into the brain, or geez, man, let me try again. The carotids go to the skull and then branch internally into a bunch of chambers in the bone itself. All right, anybody else got questions at this stage? And I am going to continue on. Let's see. Yeah, that's all very important stuff. Everything we just talked about, that really matters. All right. You can guess that I'm going to put some of the really nice skin slides that I've got on this exam. So we had talked a little bit about the skin model earlier. All that stuff off the skin microscope slides is fair game as well. You can pretty well guarantee all the parts of the hair follicle, right? Like all the accessory structures that connect to that hair follicle. Like I've got some really beautiful images of that, so just be prepared. Be able to tell me about the differences between thick skin and thin skin, keratinized versus non-keratinized, based off of a picture. So if I show you a picture of the skin, be able to tell me if it's thick or thin, in other words, keratinized or non-keratinized. Okay, you need to be able to tell me the difference between right and left humerus, right and left scapula, right and left tibia, right and left femur. All of those, be able to tell me right to left, based off of the features that you can see in the images I will provide. And further, you can guarantee I'll put a few little parts and pieces off of these on there, just as time progresses. Let's see, what else do we have here? What is going on? Sorry, I'm being invaded. And we talked about the articulations, did we not? So like shoulder and elbow and rib. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that we haven't talked about. I'm a big fan of the radius and the ulna and how they articulate and the parts and pieces therein. So if I were you, I would be friends with that. That pivot joint is very important there. Okay, well, I'm on. Bear with me, folks. I'm on Zoom here, wife. That's what happens when the other computer is not functioning correctly. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, major parts of the scapula are fair game. So all the parts of the scapula, acromion versus choroid process, the glenoid cavity, supraspinous and infraspinous fossa. If I were you, I would know how your clavicle connects to the scapula. I would know how your humerus articulates with the scapula, and I would grasp that the scapula sort of is free floating in the skeleton, like being with its only connection being the scapula to the manubrium of the sternum. So it's kind of a weird setup. Your shoulder, the reason it has so much free motion in that ball and socket joint is that it really isn't very well connected to the rest of the skeleton. Not well supported, you might say. All right. Being able to tell me about a patella, the patella being a sesamoid bone, that's certainly fair game. Let me see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Bear with me, folks. Let me check one more thing here, and then I think we're going to be done. That is, if my computer will load this file. Well, while we're waiting, does anybody have any questions? So the idea is that what I'm trying to do right now is make it very, very hard for you to do very poorly. Does that make sense? So will there be things on the test that we have not directly talked about today? Yes. But is the stuff that I'm talking about right now going to be very, very important and keep you from failing it? Yes, absolutely. My goal is that if you're here and you're doing the work, that it's going to be harder for you to do poorly on this test, I should say. But everything's fair game. So all those bones are fair game. I've gone through and made a bunch of images. I've made all the images for the exam. I've got all those images uploaded, and I've just got to build the test itself. The stuff that we just talked about is certainly the more important bits. Like, I could throw in other things. Like, we might talk about one of my favorite things to discuss is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium and its role in your respiratory system. All right, how you are able to remove debris from your respiratory system by using this tissue. I mean, I think that's just really cool. Like the cilia there do a neat job for us. Like I will probably reference the different fiber types in connective tissue and make you tell me about them a little bit. But other than that, man, yeah, that's about the extent. All right, go ahead. Yes, that's correct. So the way I expect this is almost the entire exam will be short little answers. Okay, like one word's all you got to put. So I'll point at like the head of the humerus and say identify this structure, and you're gonna say that's the head of the humerus, or you know the head of the what part of the humerus is this? It's the head. Like very short, concise little answers, and potentially at the end I might open up some like a sentence or two type questions where you can just prove to me that you know some things so that I can apply extra points to it, if that makes any sense at all. I just want to have it set to where I can help you out if necessary. So yeah, yeah, that's that's so yes, fill in the blank, and probably if I'm being completely honest, some either or type questions, like is this the right or the left? You know, I like those. Is this going to connect to that part of the bone or that part of the bone? Like straightforward. Yeah, that's my goal. All right, anybody else? First thought process here is I wonder if if Canvas will tell you that you're spelling it wrong. Like, I bet it pops up red. And then my second thought is, if it does pop up red, is it just because Canvas doesn't know what that word is? My third comment to you is this, and I would not quote me on this, but as long as I kind of know that you know what you're doing, I'm probably going to be relatively lenient. I'm not an ultimate stickler on this sort of thing, but if you make a pattern of badly spelling these words, I might dock a point here or there, but it ain't gonna be half your test if that's what you're asking me. So maybe a point here or there, but most of the stuff that I recall pulling up, it's not that complicated to spell. Like, wait till we get to the muscles, right? And you got to spell sternocleidomastoideus like that, then it gets complicated. But tell me head of the humerus, that's not as bad. Anybody else? I hope to open it at some stage Friday. In the perfect world, it would open in the morning Friday, and it will close Sunday night. Yeah, no problem. Anybody else? Yeah, we'll talk about it. Let me get these guys done, and we can chat about Bio 1. Yeah, no problem. Anybody else for anatomy? Yes, sir. 50 questions. I don't really see it taking you more than 50 minutes. Like, the way that I have this put together, it should be pretty straightforward. But 50 questions. I would call them fill in the blank. Like, literally, I'm looking for one or two words on almost every question. So not sentences. Very few sentences. Those are much harder to grade. All right. Anybody else? All right. Well, I call that a good lab review, and yeah, let's go from there. All right. Thanks for coming, guys. I hope you do outstandingly well. Nothing would make me happier. No problem. All right. So I'm gonna do some Bio 1 now, and the rest of you guys can listen if you'd like.